Nothing will crush a real estate investor's spirit like landlord stress. The difference between being successful and miserable in managing properties is education. Welcome to Landlord University, where landlords learn. Landlord University is recorded from inside the RentPrep office, where Stephen White and Jeff Pearson share the lessons learned from working with some of the most successful landlords.
Welcome to Landlord University. I'm Jeff Pearson. I'm here with my co-host, Stephen White. Hello, Stephen. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, Jeff. Big special day today, obviously. Want to
It
let us
is.
in on what it is today?
Absolutely. We have hit our 100th episode. Since we launched this back in, what was that, April? We have done 100 episodes, and we're looking forward to the next 100 episodes. And we're going to kick it off with a new type of episode. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the new episode segment, it's going to be landlords telling their story. And we got a very special guest on the show today, somebody who reached out to us to give us a suggestion on the show. If you guys are listening to the podcast, you remember a couple of episodes ago, we had Randy Harris who mentioned he wanted us to cover some topics on online rental collection services like Dwala and Intuit payment services. So we covered that gladly. We always love any kind of feedback from listeners and landlords who are listening in, and I thought it was a perfect opportunity to keep a conversation going with Randy and have him on the show and start to pick his brain and find out what he's been up to as a landlord and hopefully be able to pull some really valuable information and actionable advice that other landlords can learn from, because of course that's the whole point of Landlord University, is for landlords to be able to share experiences, learn from others, and usually it's us that is that's telling the landlord story. So I'm really excited to have Randy on today and hear it directly from him and how his landlording experience has been.
Yes, very much so. Welcome, Randy.
Hi, how are you guys?
We're doing well.
Yeah, excited to have you on, Randy. And I gave you a little bit of an intro there, but if you could tell us about uh, what you're doing in the landlording space and how long you've been doing it, and how you stumbled upon the RentPrep podcast, Landlord University.
Sure, thank you. Well, it's a real treat to be on for the 100th episode and the first landlord guest onto the show. I really appreciate that. So, my wife and I have thought for several years of getting a rental property and doing hands-on management for the landlord duties. With two little kids and a busy schedule, we seem to always have a reason to put it off, kick the can down the road a little bit, if you will. And we decided it was finally time to get serious about it. And that kicked off the whole new learning process of looking for rental properties, what made sense, what areas of town we're looking for, and services that we might need. As you mentioned before, the online payment systems and tenant screening such as RentPrep. So that decision really kicked off a big research on my part, trying to educate myself as well as I could. And in that process, that's how I stumbled upon RentPrep and Landlord University and the RentPrep blog. And it's honestly been a invaluable resource for someone as myself who is new to this whole world of being a landlord.
Mm-hmm. And we love hearing that, of course, that that you've listened to the podcast and you're able to pull anything out that was able to help you. So you just started with this. Tell us when you got your first property and about when it was.
Yeah, we looked for not too long, maybe a month or so, and I was looking at online housing information sites to kind of assess what home values may be and what the expected rents might be, and we use that as a way to narrow down and then use the realtor to identify specific properties and go look at them. And we were able to acquire our first rental home. It was August 11th, just a few months ago. So it's been a very short time for us, but so far, knock on wood, it's gone very well. we were able to turn that house around in just about 2.5 weeks and had it rented out at the next full month period.
Nice.
And yeah, yeah, and
When we were
it's
talking before we started recording, you mentioned that you pretty much did all of the work yourself. What type of work did you do in that short period of time?
yeah. Well, so one of the pieces of advice we got from a friend who's a landlord is to, as he phrases it, buy a house with good bones.
Hmm.
So, in other words, you don't want structural problems, you don't want roofing, you don't want an old air conditioner. So, we tried to find a home that really just needed a little cosmetic work to get it rent ready.
That
Hmm.
makes good sense.
Yeah, and fortunately, we didn't have any surprises. But so I was in the home painting the entire house, changed out the fan lights, which were I don't know, of a different era, I will say.
Right.
Changing some light fixtures, changing the locks, that sort of thing. The big time consumer was painting the entire home. That took quite a while. The interior.
Yeah, that's
Right.
always a big project.
It is,
But
yeah.
it makes a huge difference, and especially if you pay attention to the colors that you're using, you can make it look much more modern and contemporary just with a little bit of paint.
Probably your biggest bang for the buck, in my opinion. It, not, I mean, obviously, a lot of people don't want to come in and see scuffed up walls and marks and that sort of thing, but
Hmm.
this house happened to be one which had some pretty irrational color choices inside. And I think that would have been a tough sell for a tenant to come in and see this day glow orange, I mean, yellow, for example, in the family room. It was pretty appalling.
Sounds like it. So you bought the property in a few short weeks. You had it ready to rent. How did you decide what you were going to charge for the rent?
Well, like I said, we had first looked online to get an idea of what estimated rents would be, and then we just simply started doing some hands-on research, and we really we looked at the similar sources a renter would use online to find properties.
Hmm.
And we didn't actually go visit properties. I felt kind of like I didn't want to put that imposition on somebody else, just doing homework and not as an actual renter.
Hmm.
But we tried to look at pictures online and the marketing material that other people were putting up just to see that we were in the ballpark, if you will.
Hmm.
Right.
And I found that a pretty decent way to assess what the rent should be for the property.
And it was pretty decent of you to consider other landlords' time and to have that consideration and say, "Ah, I don't want to waste their time." Um, did you use sites like Zillow or RentFax or any of those to for the estimates on what the market rental was going to be?
Yeah, I did. I use Zillow pretty much exclusively. I
Did you find them to be pretty close after your research to what they were estimating the rental market to be?
I really did. It's interesting because I don't know if it's house to house or sometimes neighborhood, but I find that Zillow property value estimates can sometimes be more off. But for whatever reason, I find their rental estimates to be pretty darn close in my area.
Mhm.
That's
You're
interesting.
you're not the only person to mention that. It's funny. I've heard plenty of people say that, and I remember I was at a conference and there was this new company starting, kind of like a spin-off of figuring out the rental rates, and somebody made a comment and said, "Well, Zillow's not great at pricing, but for rental rates, they're actually pretty good." So you're not the only person
Hmm.
I've heard say that, and so it's good to get confirmation on that too.
Yeah, and that's interesting to hear as well.
How did you ultimately decide to market your property?
Well, I'll be honest. I took some of the advice from the Landlord University show, and
Excellent.
we ended up using a service. I believe it was called Postlets
Yeah.
to
Hmm.
to get it out onto many different sites simultaneously.
Hmm.
Um, if I remember, I had to do some manual work to get it on the Craigslist through
Hmm.
that site, but it was interesting for me as a first time, with a landlord trying for the first time to rent a new property or new property to me, because I would say the overwhelming majority of people who contacted me was through Zillow. I almost had no contact from people on Craigslist or like Trulia, or I forget some of the other sites even it was listed on.
Mm-hmm.
So and again, this may be a regional or even more local than that, but it seems in Phoenix, Zillow,
Mm-hmm.
eh, for the market we're in with that home anyway, it seems to be the dominant source for people looking at
Yeah,
properties.
they're a giant. They're becoming like the Google of the rental industry. I forgot what the amount was. Back in the beginning of the year, they got some sort of investment injection. It was upwards of 500 million or whatever it was to improve their service, and so they're pretty much just dominating at this point. So it doesn't shock me that
Yeah,
they're doing a lot to get their stuff high on search. And so when people are searching for rentals, I think Zillow is probably coming up most often, which is probably driving most of the leads that you're getting and things like that too. So that makes sense.
And just
right.
to clarify, you got your ad onto Zillow through Postlet, right?
I did. I
Okay.
did. Oh, and I failed to mention, I also I had a sign, a for rent sign in the front yard,
Hmm.
and that did drive quite a few phone calls, which
Hmm.
surprised me a little bit because this is not a main thoroughfare where the home is. It's a bit off the beaten path, and
Hmm.
I kind of wondered if I would even generate any interest off that sign, but I did get quite a few phone calls though.
And so, do you know where you ended up getting your renter from? Did you track back to see where they originally found you?
I did, and it was from the Zillow ad.
The
Yeah.
Zillow. Cool. All right. Very good.
Hmm.
And how many? What was your response to the marketing? How many applicants did you have that were interested, and how many actually went through the process of viewing it or filling out an application?
Yeah, the short answer is not as many as I would have liked. We had it priced, not aggressively low, but not crazy high either. It seems like most people around here do require now between a 25 and maybe up to $60 application fee
Hmm.
to cover that screening cost. So I, um, I had probably half a dozen people come and look at the property. I had, I don't know, several dozen either phone calls or emails regarding it, and most did not end up coming for one reason or another.
Hmm.
And I know this is something you guys always say don't do, but I had an unmarried couple that we rented to,
Hmm.
and they were the first people to get the application in.
Hmm.
And I know you recommend to get two or three. You don't want to pick
Hmm.
the worst of the group sort of thing. But we were pretty happy with the report that came back. Um, and we decided to not wait for other applicants and to go ahead and rent to them.
Yeah, but listen, I'm not necessarily opposed to that. If you run them and they come back and you're thinking, wow, these people really hit the mark for everything.
Hmm.
They went through and their background looks good, their credit's in good shape. They obviously gave you the right gut feeling, and I think
Yep.
that if all those elements are met, then anything beyond that might just be a waste of time or spinning your wheels. So I don't I'm not going to knock it. I think most of the time most landlords don't get lucky on that first shot like that. But you did the right thing and you followed all the right procedures. You ran the information, you did your due diligence, and they came back good. So
Yeah, I think it worked out well all in
yeah.
all. I would love to have had three, four, or five people that I ran at once and was able to pick,
Hmm.
maybe who I felt was better of that group.
Hmm.
But the fact is, the reports came back very positive. It looked good. And I was also slightly comforted in the fact that I have two people on the lease, not
Hmm.
one.
Yes.
So I'm not sure in reality that would really save me if I were to have to go after somebody for something. But at least I have two people to who are on the hook, so to say.
That's
Right.
right. There are a couple of thoughts that I had about that. One, we just recorded the other day an episode that'll be coming out probably just after this one, titled "You Wouldn't Hire This Guy. Why in the world would you even consider renting to him?" And we really go into that whole gut feeling aspect. We've talked
Hmm.
before. We certainly want to use as much data as possible in terms of background checks and doing all the phone calls to do all of the research necessary. But there's also that gut feeling part. And we talk a little bit more about that in this episode, but that's I'm sure a big part of why you decided this was the right move. Go ahead and bring these people on as your tenants. And the other thing I was thinking, and even though you said, as we've talked about many times, we say, you really want to have 2 or 3 applicants at least to be able to make that comparison. But one of the things that we haven't taken into account, and I really like the fact that you mentioned it, is the fact that so many of these people are looking at a number of different places, and they have to decide where to spend their money to do those background checks. If you spend even, round it down, $50, if you apply to 2, 3, 4 different places, that starts to get pretty expensive, and all you're doing is applying. And so
That's right.
I
Adds
think
up
that
very quickly.
yeah, it really does reduce the number of people who would otherwise apply, who love it. I'd love to live here, but let me go ahead and apply at this one. I like the color of the living room better in this one than that one, so I'm going to apply there first. If I don't get that, maybe I'll come back. So that's a really good real world situation that we have to pay attention to, in that you might not get that many people. And
Yeah.
It's one of those things that we've never talked about it, but I would say if you're in that situation and somebody comes through the door that your gut feeling is this person is great, then the question is, do you let them know, hey, I would really like you to apply. I think you have a lot to bring to the table. I like you as a person, and I will cover your application fee.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those, again, going back to this whole concept of running this as a business, there are times that you have to spend a little bit of money to make the right moves. And if somebody just strikes you as that perfect person, maybe it's the right thing to do. It's always something for people to keep in the back of their mind, especially considering the fact that, as you mentioned, people are hesitant to submit an application because they don't want to have to pay that fee.
Right.
And
And Jeff, can I bring up something really quickly?
Absolutely.
So you just mentioned something that treating it like a business. Regarding this home and the tenants that we ended up going with, I have a little story along that line.
Oh, great.
So the couple had done the application, and we responded favorably, and got back to them that we would love for them to rent the property. And the gentleman had another place he was committed to, I think, for the next month after. So I think it was September 2nd, we were looking to rent the property because of the holiday on the 1st.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a commitment through the end of September in his current place. And he came to me and said, well, we really like the place. We'd like to rent it, but I just can't eat 2 months rent. How about we go for September 15th? And oh, by the way, I need you to knock $50 off the rent to make it competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the tie into the treat it like a business.
Perfect.
And I said to him, we would really love to have you in the property, but I'm sorry, our target rent date is the 2nd of September, not the 15th of September. And the price is very competitive. We're not going to be lowering the price. And I may have lost him, but it worked out that I think he was just seeing if he could get a better deal. And I can't blame him for asking.
Yeah,
that's right.
But they did end up renting, and at least 3 or 4 rent payments later, no one's complained about it or anything. So for me, that was the right decision to make.
That's
absolutely. Yeah, and we just recently did an article on our blog, kind of along the same lines about how to handle those situations where the tenant comes in and asks, tries to negotiate the rent. And I think there are definitely certain types of people that that would try and do that. I'm that way. I just bought a car, and I told the the person I was dealing with, who I somewhat knew. I said, listen, I'm not going to try and beat you up, but that I gotta do my job here and try and negotiate. And I think that just goes with the territory sometimes. But as a landlord, I think you earn a lot of respect by standing your ground and saying, no, you know what, I think we priced it pretty fair, and it is what it is. And any reasonable person, I think at that point says, okay, yeah, that's fine.
On the flip side to that, you prepared your property. You painted the interior, you replaced some of the fans and fixtures, you made it present well. And so you could be comfortable saying, no, we have set this at the right price, and we've prepared it to meet that market price.
Right.
And so
That's right. Yeah.
it's not as if you can show a piece of junk and then be completely unwavering in those types of negotiations. But when you've done everything that you should do to prepare it, then yeah, you can hold your ground.
Yeah. And ultimately, I think we had it priced at a very fair number as well.
Hmm.
Had we wanted to hold out, maybe we could have got a little more, but I didn't want to have to lose a month's rent to get an extra small amount per month. It didn't make sense to me.
Right. And from a negotiating standpoint, they were asking for two gives in this
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
situation. And if you felt that you needed to do some type of negotiating on one or the other, I would definitely pick one or the other.
Right. Right.
Certainly wouldn't give in to both of those asks if you feel that you should negotiate. And again, that's the type of thing that really, when it comes to rent, you set your rent price and it is what it is. As far as the move-in date,
Hmm.
sometimes, yeah, if it seems to make sense for your situation and you just get the sense that this is going to be a make it or break it situation, then you might want to do that negotiating. But I would, in most situations, stand your ground.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it becomes a deal breaker, you're going to have to decide, is it worth it to me to make this type of an adjustment? But if you're going to do it, do some negotiating. Don't give them exactly
Sure.
what they ask.
And don't overlook the really important piece of this story that you told, Randy, is that I think it speaks a lot to the tenant's character, that he wasn't going to just break that lease that he had with the other landlord. He had some sense of commitment there, that he was still locked in. And don't get me wrong, I mean, everybody knows that when you're that deep into a lease, realistically you could walk away, and there's not a whole lot anybody can do about it at that point,
That's right.
unless they want to try and chase you down. But he was a pretty long-term tenant, if I'm understanding correct, at his previous place. And I think that says a lot about his character, that he wasn't willing to just hang the other place out to dry, and that he says, listen, I'm still on the hook here for another month, and I can't pay two. So
Mm-hmm.
that would have went a long way in my book too.
Yes.
No, I agree. I think that went a long way to
Hmm.
his credibility as a renter for me.
Definitely.
So in this short period of time that you've been a landlord, do you think that there have been any mistakes that you've made, or has everything gone relatively smoothly?
Well, I think it's really gone very smoothly, actually. And I will say one item that I have not done yet that has come up on the podcast uh, frequently, or semi-frequently anyway, is to be prepared for when disaster strikes the home. Right? Have
Right.
your list of your handymen and tradesmen and stuff. And I have not done that yet, and it's on my mind.
Hmm.
I need to put that together, and I'd like to also give some names and numbers to the renters,
Hmm.
so that if there is a true emergency and I'm not available, they have someone to call.
Right. Yeah, I think that stuff, especially for a newer landlord, it's going to go one of two ways. It's either going to happen by necessity or by some foresight and prepare. So, you're going to cross that bridge sooner or later. I think every landlord does. So, preparing ahead of time for it's just going to alleviate a little bit of that stress for you. So, it may not be super high on the priority list, but definitely an important thing to get those things in order, and that way you're not being bugged at 2 in the morning because of a clogged toilet or something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, look, just to track back a little bit, Randy, I know that you mentioned that you were working with a real estate agent to find the property. Was it a real estate agent that specialized in rentals or working with investors, or how did you make that connection or relationship with the agent?
Yeah, I'm aware there are people who specialize in that field, but I'll be honest. This is my mother-in-law.
Okay.
Perfect.
She is a longtime agent in this area, and it certainly was not any issues for me going through her. It wasn't an obligation. She does a very good job and knows the market.
Hmm.
So that was an easy choice for us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody that can give you the honest, they can be honest with you and say, "Yeah, this place is a dump. Don't do it," or,
Yeah.
"Don't. I'm not going to waste your time showing you this." And she probably, like you said, she knew the market. She knew exactly what was going to be a good deal for you. So that's excellent too.
Yeah. Yeah. It worked out well.
And does she do anything with the marketing aspect of it? Does she help landlords find tenants too, or not, none of that at all?
No, I don't think she does any on the rental side for that.
Okay,
Simply, strictly for acquiring the home or selling property.
gotcha, gotcha.
Yeah.
So at
Yeah,
this, go ahead, Steve.
no, I was just gonna say I know a lot of landlords that try and find that perfect uh, combination, out there, and there are a lot of agents that do specialize in that, especially after the market shift, and moving towards a lot of rentals. There's a lot of real estate agents that basically, learned to adapt or they were going to die, so that they started getting into the rental industry. So they're definitely out there, but
Hmm.
I love your story that you had a good agent, and from that point, the agent basically was out of the picture, and you took this on as your own endeavor.
Right. Right. Yep. And when we were looking for, we were marketing the property, looking for prospective tenants. Something a friend had recommended, who has a large portfolio of properties, is he puts together a list of, um, it's not a copy of the lease, but it's almost like pre-qualification list, if you will.
Hmm.
I forget the title he puts on the actual document, but we looked at his document that he used and did some research online, and we did put together a similar list of tenant qualifications.
Hmm.
And for example, one of them was, I was insisting people use the Intuit payment network for rent collection, rent payment. It talks about a lot of the items on the lease,
Hmm.
and I felt that was a valuable way for someone who's interested in the property to quickly scan that sheet, see if anything is a red flag for them, with having to go to the length and wait.
Did
Hmm.
you email this to them or give it to them when they toured the property?
I had it on site at the property. Yeah. I'm in process of putting together a website. Even though we only have one property, we'd like to get more, and I want to have that look, a professional look for it. So
Hmm.
I will probably put those documents on the website as well. I'm just not to that point yet.
I think even just having that and giving that to people who tour the property again goes back to what we keep talking about, running this like a business, presenting yourself as a professional, and to
Hmm.
hand something like that to them that shows them that you've given this some thought and that you are running this as a professional. It has to make a difference.
Right.
I think it's important, and I will say that a couple of the people who came to look at the property, obviously they didn't know me and they didn't know our background, and I had a few people ask me what other properties we had available for rent.
Hmm.
Really?
So I think to some degree that just speaks to the fact that I think we were doing it in a professional manner, not.
Right.
um, I've seen some landlords who clearly don't operate that way, and
Hmm.
I just feel it's probably not the approach I would choose to take. That's all.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think you're right. Because of the way you presented yourself and having that information sheet, you gave people the impression that you were a big business renting a number of different properties.
Right.
Hmm.
It came across organized, and of course, you're building that trust, so that's excellent too. And so, Randy, let me ask you, as I'll call you a newbie landlord. 'Kay, you've been
Sure.
a landlord for a relatively short period of time, but you learned a ton in that short period of time. Um, and so I definitely commend you on jumping right in. I know that Mike Simmons, our friend at Just Start Real Estate, that's his whole philosophy, and he would be giving you kudos as well, saying, "Hey, good job, just jumping right in and just getting it done, and instead of sitting around thinking too long about it." Um, so, as a newbie landlord, if you were to pass along a piece of advice or anything that you may have learned that you think would be good for another newbie landlord or any landlord in general that could benefit from it, what do you think you'd pass along that you've learned?
Well, it's been a very whirlwind time with this property the last few months, but I have to say, probably like so many things, really doing your homework up front. And part of that would be on the selection of the property, and trying to, as accurately as possible, assess what the financial um, situation will be with the property. I think that's very important to know what you're getting into, to really have an idea of what it's going to cost to get it up to where you're going to rent it. Um, like I say, for me, that was paint and fixtures and that kind of thing. But I'll tell you, even though I didn't do a ton, it was still maybe $2,500 for everything.
Mhm.
So even on a minor cosmetic thing, it can still add up quickly. So I think doing the homework and really knowing how that's likely to fall out is really important. We chose the landlord ourselves, and so that's how I ran across RentPrep, both the
Mhm.
blog and the Landlord University podcast. And I was trying to get up to speed with a lot of this topic information that I just really didn't know much about. My dad was a landlord for years as I was growing up, and I would bet he would have paid anything at the time to have tenant screening services, because I just don't think that was available, or at least not affordable back then.
Mhm.
Um, so even though I've only submitted a couple applications for review, that has been uh, um, a very worthwhile, endeavor to get into for rental property, in my opinion.
Ah,
In fact, I can't imagine renting someone to somebody without having checked into their background a little bit.
right. Yeah, it is crazy, especially, we live in that day and age where, that stuff's available. You can get it. So, and like
Sure.
you said, even a few years ago, I remember when we first started getting into this industry, it was sort of the age of the guru, the content wasn't on the internet like it is nowadays. The whole
Hmm.
the whole idea is even based around my company or even this podcast is that it's free content. We're willing to share what we know and share what we've learned. And back then, 10 years ago even, that was totally different. There used to be a few gatekeepers, a couple of people that they considered themselves gurus in the industry, and you paid a really high price to go learn from them, and they would coach you or teach you or whatever. And now that stuff's all available. It's just a matter of, like you said, doing the homework and just taking the time to learn and to figure that stuff out. And so I definitely applaud you on
Yeah.
being that do-it-yourself landlord, making sure that you got it right, and you did all of your due diligence to make sure that you were going to try and make it as smooth as possible. And let me point out, it doesn't always run as smoothly as it did for you the first time. So I think that's awesome too, and probably a testament to the work that you did put in ahead of time. I think we hear stories. I certainly hear horror stories of their first experience and the laundry list of things that people have done wrong. Um, but again, I think that you went into it like you should. Learn everything you can, find the resources, they're out there, and then just
Hmm.
start following steps.
Yeah. And in addition to RentPrep, I will say, well, I don't think of myself as a stalker, but
Hmm.
I did go look up the two people who were looking at renting on both Facebook and Twitter and those type of sites.
Hmm.
And my goal was not to pry, and I wasn't looking for, personal information sort of thing, but I just was trying to judge character of the person, if you will, by seeing some social media information out there. And there was nothing that alarmed me, and I don't look at them after that initial time. But
Right.
but I thought that was a little look into the window,
Yeah.
sort of.
Yeah, there's always something sort of dirty feeling when you're doing that, but I think that it comes with the territory. You gotta do it, and
Hmm.
like you just said, it was just to make sure that you weren't missing anything obvious, and you wanted to make sure that their character sort of reflected what you thought you saw, and it did. Um,
Yeah, yeah. And again, I really wasn't looking for personal info. I was
right,
just making sure this wasn't someone that I didn't feel was proper character
right, right,
to be our renter.
right.
And then
It.
we also set up a separate checking account for the property
Hmm.
to keep the records separate. One of the advantages with the online electronic rent collection is that they maintain records for you of rent collected and dates and amounts and all that, and that eases my requirements a little more. I don't have to fill out a spreadsheet or a ledger or whatever it might be to track all that. It's there for me.
Yeah. Everything you
Definitely.
can do to make it simpler but give you the detail that you need is good.
Hmm. And similar to the episode recently where you talked about a lot of the Google services,
Hmm.
Hmm.
um, I didn't happen to use Google, but I did set up uh, email specifically for rentals. So my renters, I did give them my cell phone in case they need to contact me for something, but they don't have my personal email. They have, a landlord email, which still comes into my phone and computer.
Right.
So I wanted to distance ourselves a little bit from the property, yet still make myself available.
Right.
It's a good way to do it. And certainly they need to have a cell number or a phone number to be able to reach you. Probably cell number is best. And even though we recommended considering some other things, that's complicated. If you use the Google Voice thing, it's just another complication. Giving them your cell phone is not a bad thing at all. It gives them the ability to contact you. And if you've done your research right, if you've picked the right tenant, it shouldn't be a problem.
Right.
And if you start to see it's a problem, then you realize you better not do that in the future.
Right.
Yeah. And I think on that same Google services episode, you guys mentioned about putting up documents, the lease documents, and maybe pictures and that sort of thing. And I'm not storing video online, but I did have the foresight I went through the entire home inside and out, and I videotaped everything just so that if there is any dispute down the road, I have video dated from, the day before the renter moved in, and I can say, well, you can see here, this was the status of whatever it may be before you moved in, and it's not like that anymore. So we have a problem.
Good.
Good. Without any sort of documentation, I don't know how you would resolve that, in an easy way.
That's right. Now, you mentioned that you are going to look at getting some additional properties down the road. How soon do you think you're going to be looking at your next one?
Well, I'll be honest. I'm actually unemployed right now. I got offshored to headquarters in Singapore, so I'm certainly not looking at another property until I'm back in a full-time position.
Right.
But realistically, I don't want to get in over my head, and I would like to kind of ease into another property or two. So I don't know. I would assume maybe within the next 12 months we would target maybe trying to pick up a second property.
That seems pretty reasonable.
Yeah, I don't, like I say, this is all new to me, and I realize it has gone very well so far. I don't want to assume the second or third property will necessarily be quite as smooth and easy as this one has been. And I just don't want to be overwhelmed as a do-it-yourself landlord.
Right.
Completely understandable.
Well, if you keep following all the steps that you have so far, Randy, I think you're definitely on the right track. And we all know that, of course, anything can happen, and sometimes the worst. But I think as a landlord, if you're doing your homework, doing everything that that you should be, you're minimizing that potential for disaster to strike. And I think I think you're doing it the right way.
Well, thank you. Yeah. I forget the saying, but there's some saying about creating your own luck, and I'd like to think I'm helping that situation.
Well, I say very often on the show that landlords very often create their own problems. So I think it goes along the same line there. Most of the landlords that I talk to that are in some dire strait, or they're just in this horrible situation, and it's really easy to see what the root of that problem was, and it was usually some poor decision or bad mistake that they made that didn't seem like a big mistake, but like, for example, you video recording the property. That's something that once you need it and you don't have it, it's too late. You can't turn back time and go get that. So having the foresight to do things like that really set you up for success when you do need it. So it's those type of things are invaluable. Those are the things that'll keep you successful.
And one of the things go ahead. Go ahead, Randy.
Well, I was just going to mention, and I think it was on Landlord University where a topic was mentioned about, if a rent is paid on time, maybe you accrue a small dividend to go back to the renter, sort of thing, after the end of the year. And that I'm certainly interested in maybe exploring that type of option more to basically reward a good renter, right? I mean, you want to keep a good renter.
Exactly.
Things like maybe keeping the rent from increasing while they're still there, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the people we have in now, one of the things he let me know up front, our lease states that we don't do month to month when the lease is up. You need to re-up for another year.
Right.
And he said, "Hey, I've got to tell you, I'm going to." He's in a medical school right now. He says, "I'm going to get out this time of year, and I really don't know if I'm going to be able to stay a full year, for the second year." And we talked about it for a minute, and essentially, in a few more words, what I told him is, well, if you're a good renter and you don't give me a hard time, I'm going to be happy to rent to you month to month for 3-4 months and keep you around instead of losing you because I'm stubborn and demand it has to be a 1-year lease.
Exactly. Right. As far as the whole thing about not raising the rent on a renter, it makes a ton of sense. You get to the end of the lease and you're thinking, I can afford to not raise the rent $50 if, in all other situations, I would do it. My thinking on that would be you go to your tenant with the new lease and you let them know, well, my standard situation would be I would raise the rent $50 or whatever it's going to be. But you guys have been great tenants. Everything's working. The money's working out fine for me. I'm not going to raise the rent if we go ahead and sign this new lease. Take advantage of that goodwill that you've earned by not raising the rent and let them know, I would normally raise the rent, but you guys are great and I'm not going to do it. Goes back to that
that's a great
customer
idea
service.
to present it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I forgot whose advice it is, but I've heard somewhere, good business advice. If you're going to give something away for free, you make sure that everyone knows
That's right.
that you're doing it. It's got to get back some way to shine a good light on you. So yeah, I agree with that completely.
Sure. Yep. And
from a financial perspective, if you just stand by your guns and maybe you want that $50 increase, what are you really gaining if you lose a tenant and lose a month or two in rent and have to repaint and clean maybe carpets and all that work around finding a new roommate? Keeping the rent that you had might be a very low cost alternative.
That's right. The $600 that you would gain with a $50 increase was just lost because you lost a month's rent and the costs of renting it out. You're very right. And those are the types of things that we need to be thinking about when we're making decisions about the property. I think one of the other things that has crossed my mind as we've been talking is I love the fact that you've pointed out so many of the things that Steve and I have talked about, and we kind of talk about them as you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do this. You've taken all of that information and said, yeah, I would really like to do and I will do it. This here, no, it doesn't work for me. And all of the stuff that we talk about, I mean, certainly you want to take it as a big picture and apply the things that are appropriate to you, but it's not as if you have to do absolutely everything we talk about. And I don't think that an individual who's being a landlord on the side could ever have the time to do all of the different things that we've talked about in these past 100 episodes. But I think you've done a really good job of culling that information down to what works for you. And obviously you've done well in these first 6 months of being a landlord.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's great to hear that. And right back at you two for having all this fantastic information out there every day.
Well, thank you. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your story. And we want to make sure that everybody, all of our listeners know, we'd love to hear from more landlords and start to bring some more landlords on and get the stories of the landlords and find out what's working and what's not working. And if you are interested, be sure to reach out to us. You can either reach out on the rentprep.com website, or you can send us an email at landlordu@rentprep.com. But again, Randy, thank you so much for coming on, and certainly for the recommendation for the payment episode we did of night school. That was a lot of fun, and we appreciated you reaching out to let us know, and definitely taking the time today has been wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I appreciate the show, and happy to share my limited experiences so far and help making the show worthwhile for everybody involved.
Sounds good. Maybe we'll bring you on in about a year and see how things are going after a year under your belt.
That's the real test, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I do.
All right.
Well,
Thanks, Randy.
Yeah. Thanks, Randy.
Thanks for listening to Landlord University. And remember to visit rentprep.com/landlordu to see show notes and access free resources like forms and guides. And be sure to check out Jeff Pearson hosting his own hit pod